Hey guys, I'm the Spuddler and welcome to my channel. I've been doing a lot of stuff recently which is quite serious and I just need to exercise my funny bone again. So please indulge me. There is going to be a serious message at the end of this and I will talk about the victims in this case. But for now, please let me just tell you one of the funniest stories I think I've heard in quite some time. And that is the story of the Somerset Gimp. Hence the outfit. Anyway, that's better. Sorry about that. I just couldn't really resist that one. But now I'm going to tell you this story. It started in, probably about summer of 2018. And there were beginning to be some signs that something strange was going on at night in a Somerset village. So this week I'm going to tell you a story from the United Kingdom and specifically England and the North Somerset area that surrounds Yatton, a small town which is about 9 miles east of Weston-super-Mare and about 13.5 miles south of Bristol. You could easily describe this town and the surrounding villages as quintessentially English, and in fact it is a really beautiful part of the world. And this kind of makes this story even more bizarre. So this story begins in the summer of 2018 and the Avon and Somerset police force were beginning to receive some strange reports. And what the general public were telling them was that they were seeing a man dressed in a very strange outfit behaving in a very odd way. Some people reported seeing this man in a car park, others came across him on a public pathway, and others saw him in a distance in a field and he seemed to be rolling in animal excrement. So during the summer of 2018, I suspect law enforcement didn't really take it too seriously. With TikTok around and teenagers and it being the summer, they probably put it down to some sort of prank or some sort of TikTok short that was being made that people were seeing. So initially, because there really was no potential danger to the public, although the touching himself was a little alarming, with prioritising for more serious cases, they really didn't do much about it. Although I do suspect they probably were all on the lookout for this particular man. Now it appears that the BBC put in a Freedom of Information request and received copies of the reports from law enforcement. And I'm just going to read a couple of them to you, and you're going to get an idea of exactly what was going on.
The 23rd of November 2018 to 18 June 2019. Yatton. There are 7 police call log entries from people in Yatton reporting a man in a gimp suit in different locations in the village. In November 2018, a caller describes a man wearing a full gimp suit with a red mask, with other call logs noting a man wearing a gimp mask made of gaffer tape or a full black head gimp mask. By January 2019, the man is described as wearing a latex suit and with no eye holes, rolling around in animal excrement near field gates.
Now, to be honest, I would imagine that the residents at that point started to get a bit concerned, and I suspect the police did too, but really there wasn't much they could do about it. These encounters were very brief and fleeting, and when they got there to try and find the guy, he'd completely disappeared. Now, I should imagine it was probably the talk of the town, and in the local pubs, stories and probably jokes were told regularly each night. So it appears that some of the population were taking this really quite seriously and others just thought it was a bit of a joke. The hunt for the Somerset Gimp started to heat up when there were 2 incidents within a 48-hour period that were reported to the police. Here was what was reported to Somerset Live by the first of these 2 witnesses.
An MMA enthusiast is claiming to have beaten up a person dressed in a gimp suit who has been accused of terrorising a quiet Somerset village. Cameron Graham was walking home from a Claverham pub when he says he spotted a man lying on the floor of a car park. When he realized the figure was sporting a rubber one-piece gimp suit, Cameron said he was having none of it, the Daily Star reports. He said, "I was just walking along and there was this bloke lying on the ground in a car park next to a field. He was wearing a full gimp suit, latex and everything. He tried to get up but I was having none of it. I kicked him in the face and then to the stomach and got off." Cameron said he told several people about the incident, but was repeatedly met with disbelief. "I told everyone about it when I got home but no one believed me, not even my mum," he said. In the end I stopped telling people about it. Because he had been drinking on the night, and he recently been through a difficult breakup, Cameron said he started to doubt whether the fight ever took place. But that all changed late last week, when local Abbey was reportedly approached by a person in a black bodysuit, not far from where Cameron said he had his encounter. "Now it turns out it's true," he continued. "Bloke I kicked looks like that bloke in the photo. They're both tubby."
Forgive me for removing the balaclava, it was getting a bit hot. Now that actually is really quite funny. Oh yeah, I knew it was him because they were both tubby. As if there's lots of gimps walking around Somerset, rolling around in car parks and annoying people. Well, anyway, let's move on. That article obviously refers to a lady called Abby, and she was the lady who also had an encounter with the Somerset Gimp within that 24-hour period. Now, this lady had decided to go out for a late-night walk close to her home in Claverham. Being the middle of summer, the evenings would have been incredibly warm, and I'm sure she was looking forward to a lovely, relaxing walk before she finally went to bed that night. Little did she know that on that walk she came across the Somerset Gimp. He charged towards her, making groaning noises, and scared the living daylights out of her, I should imagine. But she was really clever, and she took a picture of him. And because of that, suddenly, the Somerset Gimp was believed to be true. And of course, now there was photographic evidence, the media got interested, and suddenly, not only Somerset, but the entire United Kingdom became aware that there was a man in a leather suit terrorising the villages of North Somerset. Personally, I'm not sure you could describe that man as chubby, but maybe it was a good picture of him, who knows. So now, the police had tangible proof that this chap really existed, and they had a photograph to ID him by. So they jumped into action and began to search for him. They put up helicopters, they dispatched some sniffer dogs, and they put search teams together to search the local countryside. Now, in an interview a while later, it does appear that Abby was really quite traumatised by this encounter, and in a later interview she said that she saw his face every time she closed her eyes now, and that she had been prescribed medication for the anxiety this had caused her. And the concern that this caused the North Somerset area meant that women began to take precautionary measures when going out at night. Ladies would only leave the pubs in groups. Residents reduced the amount of driving at night that they did because he was only ever seen at night. And generally, everybody increased their safety measures. As you can imagine, with now having actual photographic proof that this man existed, the media went wild, and merchandise began to be produced. Some people were frightened by the Gimp, especially on dark winter nights, while others, well, they felt sorry for him. In fact, later on, in 2021, the chair of Yatton Parish Council said, "There is some disquiet amongst people who worry they may come across him late at night, but there is also sympathy that this individual may have problems." It also appears that his behaviour was not only frowned upon by the residents of Somerset at that time, but also the wider Gimp community, with one fan of black bodysuits, known as the Gimp Man of Essex, complaining that the Somerset version was giving the whole Gimp community a bad reputation. Due to these searches and the investigation that then began, 2 people were arrested on 2 separate occasions, but both later were released without charge. The last reported incident was in fact in that July 2019, when a person in a black latex bodysuit and a mask touching his groin reportedly approached a young woman on the streets. Now, for some reason, the Somerset Gimp went quiet for a while, Whether that was because all of the commotion that was around and publicity around him scared him off, or, well, whether it was because we went into lockdown and there were just not enough people on the streets to be able to sight him. So, to be honest, we don't know. I mean, who knows what he did at that time to satisfy his groiny urges. But we can just assume that it was either that he went elsewhere or just people weren't out and they didn't see him. So the residents around Yatton began to think that this guy had stopped or he'd moved on, and they began to move on themselves from this incident. However, in September of 2021, the Somerset Gimp struck again. A couple at their home in the village of Claverham, watching TV late at night and minding their own business, realised that they were being spied upon. They suddenly noticed a masked man lying in their garden, watching them through their French doors. And of course, startled and probably hugely alarmed, they called the police. But the police, sadly, despite searching, couldn't find any evidence of this man. One previous victim at the time said, when she heard about the latest sighting, "My heart felt like I was running a marathon. There was an instant feeling of panic, anxiety, and anger, again, which took me over a year of private counselling and medications to control. I'm not worrying at home, I'm worrying at work because my wife's at home, and so are many other women." Now, reports of encounters of the Somerset Gimp continued throughout 2021, with various reports coming into the police of a man being seen in a car park rolling around on the ground, groaning and talking in a foreign language. Others came across him on country paths, and again he'd jump out from behind a tree, holding himself and groaning and making strange noises, all the time dressed in a gimp suit. And others even saw him at a distance rolling around in the mud, again groaning, holding himself and speaking in a foreign language, but no one really ever could identify what that language was. Suddenly, the area then was put on high alert again. Security was heightened and everybody was back on the alert. And sadly, this begins a time where it appears that the Somerset Gimp began to escalate in his behaviour. And at the time when news broke that he was back, one of the residents said this was an ongoing issue. She said, "It's normally animals involved, or he'd let himself into people's gardens and has been humping their grass or breathing on their windowsills. You know, strange things like that." Again, in another 48-hour period, the Somerset Gimp appeared to strike twice. Both incidents occurred in Accommodation Road, Bleedon, which is near Weston-super-Mare. The first incident happened late at night on the 7th of May. During this incident, a woman was driving along the road with her husband and 2 children in the back when she spotted a black figure, which looked like a person, but it was crawling on the ground. In disbelief, the pair discussed what they'd seen and convinced each other that it was likely to have been a bin bag. They chose not to call the police, but instead they did report it online. And I have a feeling once they read the report from the incident that happened the next day, they realised that what they'd seen wasn't a bin bag. And I should imagine that unnerved them greatly. And in fact, it was stated in one newspaper that the woman was so unnerved that she doesn't want to travel on those lanes anymore. Another chap, who is a passenger in a vehicle driving in the area at the same time, saw a man, as he described it, commando crawling on the floor. I can see they were all in black and shiny and the car lights were reflecting off of him. Then, shortly after midnight on the 9th of May 2022, the Somerset Gimp struck again. A woman was driving on Accommodation Road late at night with her sister-in-law and a teenage boy in the back. She came around the corner and she came face to face with the Somerset Gimp. He was standing in the middle of the road wearing a full gimp outfit and a black mask. As she went to move around him, her sister-in-law looked up from her phone, saw this apparition and let out the most almighty scream. The teenager in the back described the scream as something out of a horror movie. And although most of us probably can see the funny side of that particular event, the woman herself was really quite affected by it. And in a later interview she said, "I always take this route to work, but I won't be taking this route in the dark anymore, as it just doesn't feel safe." Now it appears that all 3 people in that car were deeply disturbed and actually quite frightened about the experience, although I think the teenager in the back probably found it more funny. But Because of that, they instantly called the police, and the police turned up within minutes. And I mean minutes. In fact, in most of the articles I read, they quoted that they were there within 5 minutes of the call being made, and that really is quite quick. And this time, their rapid response paid off. PC Declan Kopoff and his partner, PC Pickles, were the first on the scene, and sorry, I'm trying to be doing this. Every time I do it, I can't stop giggling. So you're just going to have it with me giggling, I'm afraid. I'm trying to pull myself together. Okay. PC Declan Kopoff and his partner PC Pickles were the first on the scene, and they drove around to see if there was anything suspicious and came across a man sitting in a white Berlingo van on a nearby lay-by. Oh, I quite like that, nearby lay-by. Oh, stop it. Okay. They parked behind him, approached his car, banged on his window and asked him to identify himself. The officers observed at the time that he was wearing grey sweatpants and a blue hoodie. When asked what he was doing there, he didn't really have a satisfactory answer. All he actually said was, "I'm not a gimp, and I don't have a gimp suit," which is kind of weird. So after that response, the officers decided to arrest him on suspicion of being a public nuisance, and then they searched his vehicle. During the search, they came across a number of quite alarming items. There were masks, some of them with drawing on them. There was black tape, there were black gloves. They found various items of clothing, and there was also a UV highlighter pen that later on they found out he'd bought from eBay. And in certain sightings of him, it had been reported that the mask he was wearing had no eye holes or a mouth, but instead he'd used the white UV pen to put crosses where his eyes were and a big grinning smile where his mouth was. Well, I should imagine that was pretty scary too. Once he'd been arrested, they took him to the station for processing and discovered that he wasn't wearing any underwear, so I guess he was going more than just commando on the streets. And I'm probably not going to be able to say anything more than that, bearing in mind the video I did about bras, but all I can say is my mother told me once, never go out in public without clean underwear on, just in case there's an emergency. He should have thought about that, shouldn't he? When they searched his home, they came across a number of interesting items, one of them being his journal, where it appears he wrote a book about a chap called Jack, who enjoyed wearing a mask made of women's tights. And at his trial, it was shown as evidence that Hunt had gone to Asda and had many times bought tights himself. So, if you see a man in a supermarket buying tights, I'd give him a bit of a side eye if I were you. So, shortly after his arrest, Hunt appeared in court, and he was granted unconditional bail. I think that was probably done because of his mental health issues, and he believed that he'd probably get better help in the community than being put behind bars. I think perhaps the court thought that because he knew that he was in trouble, that he would curb his behaviour. But that didn't work. And as we've seen with a current court case of a creator that we all know, his arrest and forthcoming criminal court case didn't seem to affect him in any way. In fact, I think it probably made him even more determined to do it. Because after his release on bail, there were continued reports of sightings of him in the area. So in the early hours of the morning on the 26th of June, a young couple got the shock of their lives. For the purposes of this, I'm just going to be calling them by their first names. Lewis and Kira were on their way home from Bristol and had got a taxi to the Co-op in Yatton and arrived there around 1 a.m. We were just having a normal chat and just walking along as you would. We came up to the alley and out of nowhere at all, my boyfriend said to me, "There's a man." And this man then started walking towards me and my boyfriend. We both realised at the same time what he was wearing and how he was presenting himself in a way to scare us. As we announced that we were going to run, the man actually stopped and just stood in the way, where he had his arms out a little bit. We were running, but I was too scared to look back, so for all I knew, he could have still been following us. I was absolutely terrified, and it was really such a scary moment. She described him as more than 6 feet tall and slim, not chubby then, and said the incident had caused her alarm and distress. Officers carried out a search of the area but found no trace of the man, and neighbourhood officers followed up on the incident and carried out extra patrols. And I suspect as a consequence of these incidents, in July he appeared in Bristol Court and he was given a detailed interim sexual harm prevention order. And this order contained the following restrictions: not wearing a mask or face covering in public between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. unless required for medical reasons. Not wearing or possessing black all-in-one garments or tight-fitting black clothing in public between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. Not crawling, wriggling or writhing on the ground while wearing a full body covering or mask in public. Restrictions on his computer use and access to the internet were also enforced. Now, these restrictions were obviously put in place to protect the public from him. But you could say, and especially because we've got some relevant cases going on at the moment, that his freedom of expression was being curtailed. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that at the end, but I just want to throw it out there and get you thinking about, really, was the judge fair? Were those restrictions, which, albeit I should imagine she's never had to make before and never has since, but were they fair to him? Or do you think that there are unnecessary curtailments on his behaviour and freedom of expression, and therefore you believe that the judge was wrong? There were more sightings of the Somerset Gimp in the summer of 2022, including one in Yatton High Street. And then, in October that year, the Gimp was spotted in Cleve by a teenager who described his outfit as shiny and claimed he flopped to the ground and spoke in a demon language. Now, despite these repeated sightings and reports to the police, there really was no evidence for them to be able to arrest him again and charge him with further offences, until October of 2023, when a couple of guys who had just left the pub after a bit of a skinful were walking through a park on their way home and came across the Somerset Gimp. But I think because they'd had a little bit to drink, and maybe because they were young and they found things funny, rather than run away in fear as most people had done, one of them decided to get out his mobile phone and record the chap. And they had a little bit of a chat with him. Well, kind of. But listen out to the end, because you're going to hear the Somerset Gimp's voice, and I do find what they say to him really quite funny.
Hello, what? Why are you covered in mud, mate? Who collapsed you in the woods? Gimpy, isn't it? Gaggly balls.
I couldn't agree more, mate. I couldn't agree more. Fair enough. Mate, trust society.
Do you want a ciggy? Well, I can't actually light it. Did you You can have a ciggy, hold on. Stay there. Stay there. Oi.
Look what they did to you, man.
Who the did this to you, like?
Yeah. You can have a cigarette, man.
You don't want a ciggy? I'll leave on the bench. Here you go. There you go, like. This one don't roll away? Oh, okay, good.
What's going on, man? I'm speaking human to human, like. Fair play.
Alright, lad. Get him safe, alright? I'm trying. Alright, cheers, lad.
So.
Can I just say personally how wonderful I think those two lads were? I was one point expecting them to ask him if he wanted a cup of tea and they'd taken home to their mums. But for me, the best bit was when they told him to get home safe. And he replied in a really high voice, "I'll try." Anyway, these lads continued to impress me when they were interviewed, and they showed their sensitive and really quite wise understanding of what probably was going on. And I have to say that if I was either of those two's mother, I'd be very proud of them right now. And one of the teenagers in an interview later said, "I don't want this guy to be seen as a bogeyman, but this kind of thing, well, this invisible threat that he could be anywhere, it's indirectly causing fear. It's not just about the encounter, but the effect it has in waves through the community." When the other man that was there described what he'd seen, he said he took a step up onto the pavement, arched his body and flopped to the ground without putting his hands out to catch himself. His outfit was shiny with some sort of liquid, and he was glistening in the torchlight, and he smelled really earthy. After he was gone, I could still smell it. Well, of course, once that video became public, the police had to act. So he was arrested, and then he remained in prison on remand until his case came to court about a month later. As you can imagine, the court case was widely reported on, and I'm just going to read this from a BBC article because it's very well written, and I just love the BBC.
Hunt told police during an interview that his mental health had been in crisis over problems with his medication. "I am crying out for help and need help with my mental health," he said. Hunt told the court he had been in a very traumatic state of mind in May. "I hated myself with the way I looked and the way I am and everything about me," he told the court. He explained he would go out at night and change into black clothing to go mudding, where his self-loathing would cause him to cover himself in mud. "I apologize to those people," he said. "I agree what I was doing was frightening, but hand on my heart, I never intended to cause them harassment, alarm or distress." District Judge Joanna Dickens said she accepted Hunt had already spent a month on remand in prison prior to his trial. "This," she said, "was a bigger punishment than any sentence she could impose. I accept that you have already received punishment and spent time in prison and lost your good character in a very public way and no doubt affecting you for the remainder of your life," she added.
So I'm now just going to turn to another BBC article, and again the links will be in the description, and this describes how the interim order then became something more permanent.
Imposing the sexual harm risk order at Bristol Magistrates Court earlier, District Judge Joanna Dickens said, "The incidents are clearly acts of a sexual nature with a sexual element to them. A sexual risk order is quite a serious order, and it has a lot of obligations of you, and if you breach this order you can go to prison. I only make an order if I think it is necessary to protect the public from you, and I do think it is necessary," she continued. Among the restrictions imposed, Hunt is now banned from being in possession of any type of mask or face covering in a public place, including whilst in a vehicle in a public place, between the hours of 2100 hours and 6 o'clock, unless officially required for medical purposes or by law. Wearing or being in possession of black all-in-one garments in a public place, including in a vehicle in a public place between the hours of 2100 hours and 6 o'clock. Crawling, wriggling or writhing on the ground in a public place whilst wearing a full body covering. Clothing that appears like a full body covering and or mask/full face covering. Restrictions have also been placed upon Hunt's computer use and access of the internet.
And that order is in place for 5 years. So that's the end of the story. Personally, I think the chap got treated quite fairly. He's obviously got some medical conditions and some mental health issues that he needs to get resolved, and I don't think time in jail would have sorted that out or helped anybody in any way. But what was primarily important in this was the safety of everybody else, and I think the restrictions that were put on him were actually quite justified. After all, he has terrorised quite a lot of people, and there probably are still people out there that have trigger points and will restrict certain activities they do simply from the experience they had meeting this man. Now, when I started this, I really did think it was hysterical, and it still is very funny. But as I went along making it, I became more and more sensitive to really what this chap was going through. I do believe that he needs the privacy and the time to recover from whatever challenges he's experiencing. I've only mentioned his surname, and that's quite a common surname in the UK. And I'm not showing his face because I really do believe he should have an opportunity to get well, and I do hope him well if he's watching this. But to be honest, it still is a very funny story, and hopefully some of the residents of that area are now beginning to see a little bit more of the funny side to it, because it's such an odd, strange thing for someone to do. But the end of this video, I just want to put a few thoughts out there, because as I was making it, I also saw some parallels between the case with Bullhorn Betty at the moment and her cries from her sofa in Florida that there's freedom of speech, i.e. freedom of expression, and that she had every right to do whatever she wants. Well, you could say that the Somerset Gimp could say the same thing. He was expressing himself. He had the right to do that, and although what he said we couldn't really understand, he was definitely expressing himself, and technically he has freedom of expression. But there is this very particular line that he crossed, and that was he started to do harm to others. And once you start to do harm to others with the expressions that you have or the words that you say, then someone has to step in, because it isn't fair. Encroaching on somebody else's happiness so that you can fulfill your desire to free speech or free expression just isn't reasonable. And I think we all know where those lines are. Yes, you can push them a little bit, but ultimately, if you are continually to hurt people or any particular person through your expressions, through your freedom of speech, then that's wrong. And everybody should really know where their line is, and that you cannot use freedom of expression or freedom of speech carte blanche and just basically make it so that you can do whatever you like and everybody else be damned, because it doesn't work like that. And this particular case probably shows an example of how England and how us Brits deal with such issues. We have a very strong desire for privacy here. I think that makes one of the difference between us and America, that our privacy is far more important than anything else, because for us, privacy is the ability to be free. We want to be able to live freely as long as we live within the confines of not only the laws of our land, but also the social norms of the communities that we live in and civilians in general. We have a culture which is very much your home is your castle. But the minute that you start to feel unsafe because of the actions or the words of someone else, well, that's when the line for me is. Yes, you can justify it to a certain extent if you truly have a conviction and truth about something. But if it's an opinion, there is no opinion which is supreme. People's emotions, people's lives, and people's ability to go about those lives freely should not be curtailed by one person's desire to stretch the boundaries of society and the boundaries of acceptable behaviour, but preach about freedom of speech. Because it doesn't work in a society, and if everybody said and did exactly what they wanted to, but there'll be an awful lot of people that were being harmed physically out there in an instant. So there has to be some norms. And of course, as I've said before, in society, if communities can't control the bad actors and think that either the laws don't apply to them or that they know the law so well that they can stretch them right up to the end and it's still okay, well, it isn't. And unfortunately, if society and communities do not curb those people's behaviour, then the laws that we live within will become stricter. I mean, it's obvious. The government's priority is to protect the many. And sometimes protecting the many means just that a few people who don't really understand how to live in a society well have to be curtailed more, and other people who are innocent get affected by it too. So when there are laws that you don't like that are put into place, for instance, if YouTube were to change their terms of services and a particular rule, which I think we'll all come across at some point, affects the content that we create, well, remember, it's not YouTube that's doing that. It's the bad actors out there that they're having to control because we're not doing a good enough job of it. Well, that's my opinion, and obviously it is just mine. We're all different people. But I wanted to share that, and I wanted to share my views on this weaponising of freedom of speech and the impact that that freedom has on other people and why it is so wrong. But I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you had a bit of a laugh along with it with me. But I also hope that you learnt something from it, and that is the boundaries that need to be there to protect us from others and sometimes even ourselves. Anyway, I'd be interested to see what happens this week in the court case, and I'm really hoping that it will start to make some changes in our community and people are a bit more thoughtful about what they say, and that they realise that they can't use the Constitution and the First Amendment in America as a reason to say whatever the hell they like and anybody that doesn't like it be damned, because societies and communities and governments won't accept it. So please let me know in the comments what you think. Did this judge overstep her mark and encroach on the fundamental freedoms of expression with this chap? Or do you think that the sentences and the restrictions that were put on him were fair? Me personally, I think they're appropriate, and I really do hope that he's got the time now and he has people helping him to get well, because I don't believe this is a bad man after all. Physically, he didn't hurt anybody, but emotionally, he did an awful lot of harm, and that harm will stay with some people for quite some time. And just a note to his victims, I really hope that you've managed to move on from this, that the trauma that you went through is now in your past, and that you're living your best life. Leave me a comment. Please hit the like button if you like this, and share it if it made you giggle. So I'm off now to hump some grass, and if you're in the true crime community, and although I might be a little damp and smelling a bit earthy, I'll see you in chat. Somewhere, sometime, maybe.